I'll start over. Okay, what we're going to talk about today is the last thing that you're going to get good at as a teacher, and that's classroom management. And you're going to be getting, as you get closer to your student teaching and so on and so forth, you're going to be getting more and more classroom management exercises and tutelage and that sort of thing. In the year-long residency, you're going to have much more extensive classroom management techniques. Right now, to my disappointment, we only teach, well, we teach classroom management throughout, but we really get into it during the last section, the last block of student teaching, which to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But lots of things don't make sense to me, so that's just the way it is, I guess. Classroom management and diverse critical thinking are vitally important to where you're going to have to go in terms of your teaching methodologies and your teaching philosophies and those kinds of things. As you start developing your teaching techniques, as you move through your teaching career, you're not even going to realize that you're going to have a theoretical base in which you're centered around, but it's going to be there, and it's going to be a theoretical base based on what you've learned in all of your courses and everything else, and it's probably going to be a constructivist base. If you're teaching very, very well, it will definitely be a constructive base, and there'll be some behaviorism and things like that in there that you'll have to know at least to some degree. Research shows that any successful change that to take place in the school level is directly related to the skill and ability of the teachers. Never ever, as I've said before in here, let that thing dictate your teaching. Teaching is not about the advancement of technology. It's not about all these gadgets and all that other kind of thing. Teaching is about the teacher. Everything else is merely a tool for the teacher to use. And a great teacher will develop those skills and of technology and everything else that's going to come along that we haven't even fathomed yet, really, and be able to work those into the teaching lessons to help. But the definite focal point in every classroom is the teacher. The most important person, aside from the student in your classroom, is the teacher. Teachers know how to teach. Teachers come to this profession because of a long legacy of incidents that happened throughout their life that have pointed them in this direction. So if a few things would have went differently in your life, you might not be here today being a teacher. Teachers are responsible for the classes, classroom, and the learning that goes on in the classroom. That's a pretty daunting responsibility. And as you start to get into your teaching field, as I said, it's going to get easier and easier. You're going to get better and better at it, but initially it's going to be a pretty daunting responsibility. It's going to be up to you to get everybody in your class to a certain point where with the next year, the next teacher can take over and realize that where they've been was a good place. And I've seen many, many situations where you have a team of 4 teachers in 4th grade. When the 4th graders graduate to 5th grade, you can always tell where the students came from. You understand what I'm saying? Not all of the teachers are great teachers. And it shows in the students. You can definitely tell where the bad students come from. Not the bad students, but the students who didn't get the advantage of having a great teacher. And you can definitely tell where the great students came from. So, something to be cognizant of. This is a profession you have to take pretty seriously as time goes on. Teachers must understand that the learning process depends upon the classroom environment. And teachers must understand the environment is all-encompassing. The classroom environment includes the student's needs to feel valued in the process. That's a huge part of what this class is about. Helping you understand that every student deserves the same opportunity. The classroom environment, when we talk about classroom environments, is very, very encompassing. The classroom environment is everything from stuff like this, to the pictures, to the carpet, to the color of the walls, to all the stuff that you're going to stick all over the walls, especially if you're an LN teacher, and all that kind of thing. The classroom environment is about the tone that's set each and every day by the students. And as I've said before, every single tone in the classroom changes throughout the classroom. A kid comes in from lunch after getting in a fight on the playground, the whole day is different. Those are things that you're going to have to be cognizant of. So what are the changes you're going to have to make? Well, if you remember that chart that I showed you, the changes that you're going to have to make are going to be to adjust the various variables that occur in your class. You're going to have to pay some attention to one variable versus less attention to another variable. So those kinds of blankets, I like to call it a blanket, that's on the surface of that chart that I showed you, will change. The surface of that blanket will change, and it's up to your abilities to be able to change it very, very well. Of critical importance among many, many roles the teacher plays is that of creating a positive, supportive classroom environment based on a clear, well-organized management plan. Most of you are secondary ed teachers, so when we're talking about management plans, we're talking about a variety of different things. A management plan these days, and what we're trying to do desperately here is get people onto some of the management plans that are out there, such as a CAFE style, a Daily 5 style, those kinds of management plans, because they're very, very easy to follow, very, very effective, and very, very progressive in terms of their epistemology. In your case, if you're teaching at the junior high level, the middle school level, the high school level, your classroom management is going to be a little bit different. You're going to be dealing with people who are much more self-centered, much more attitude-oriented, much more into their own categorization of who they are at that particular point. You're going to be dealing with different things like what 10th grade students dating what 10th grade student. So it becomes more and more complex. I by the way, don't believe that high school people date. I think they hang out. I'm not sure that's dating. Except prom, which is a forced dating situation. Well, that's another story. You know what prom was, by the way? Why do we have prom? What's the origin of prom?
Promenade?
Huh?
Is it like promenade kind of thing?
Well, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
The origin of prom was to set girls up with guys after they graduate. Right? Make sure you married off your young ladies. So you dress up and present your best picture and all that kind of thing. And I'm not sure that there's really a place for that anymore, to tell you the truth. And there's some serious issues I have with prom, and especially for the people who get rejected, you know, and don't end up going and that kind of thing. I mean, it's an interesting situation, and it can be devastating. I've seen it. It can be devastating. You've all seen it too. So going into a classroom, teachers have to have a plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, plan E, plan F, and however the rest of the way the alphabet goes. You have to have alternate plans. You have to be able to go into your classroom like you're walking in like I am right now, and you have to be able to sense that something has changed, right? Maybe someone in the back of the room is crying, maybe they just got in from I don't know, recess or lunch or something. Something's changed. You're going to pick up on that change. That change, that picking up on the change is going to come to you very, very naturally after a while. You're not even going to have to think about it. It's just going to be there. You're going to recognize it. It's going to be built into your process, just like driving a car is, right? You don't think about it. Just like breathing. You're going to be able to recognize it as time goes on. When you get into that 5th, 6th, and 7th year of teaching, you're going to start to really come into your own and recognize the classrooms for what they are. And that's an ever-evolving environment. The classroom is never the same twice. In fact, it's never the same any given minute of any time. It's always changing. And as a teacher, you have to guide that change. The plan is the key to success, and diverting from the plan is a sign that a teacher understands the plan. One of the things that I tell most of my student teachers, at least the student teachers that are natural teachers, is that you're going to start out with lots of lesson plans. First 3 years of teaching, you're going to have a lesson plan, not a script. I don't want anybody scripting out there, right? But a lesson plan. And eventually the lesson plan is going to dissipate, just like fairy dust. I've been waiting all semester to say fairy dust. I saw it on that iMovie Maker, fairy dust. Classrooms where students feel safe to take risks are something you're going to have to develop. You're going to have to make sure students are constantly acquiring new knowledge, and know that they're valued members of the community, everything that's within your power has to be optimized. That makes you very, very powerful people. And very, very powerful people have to know what they're doing. Because it's a daunting responsibility in charge of sometimes, well, probably by the time you get there, 30 students. Could you imagine trying to teach social studies to 30 high school students? Say about 11th graders on a warm spring day, 2 weeks before prom? Ooh. Teachers must understand how and why diversity is the optimizing tool for a successful teacher. Not just cultural diversity, but intellectual diversity, emotional diversity, pragmatic diversity, and spiritual diversity, right? All those diverse entities come into play in a classroom. What if you have Muslims and people of the Jewish faith in the same classroom? It could be a problem, and it couldn't be a problem. My daughter teaches that right now, and she says it's no problem, Dad. I said, well, you're lucky, man. Teachers must keep learning to help students learn. That's one of the things that lots and lots of teachers seem to forget about, especially at this level. Being a teacher is a never-ending learning process. You'll be in school until you're done with your teaching career. Because you've got lots of professional development to go through. I don't even know how many credits you have to have a year now, or every couple of years or whatever. Depends on where you go too. Some school districts require more, some less. If you get in a union place, you can have it all paid for. If you don't get in a union place, you got to pay for it yourself. Yeah. So there's all kinds of issues going on, right? You have to be able to keep in front of the ball. How does that make you feel? I just mentioned that you're going to be in school forever. Right now it's painful for you to be right here. No comment?
It's different though.
Yeah, it is different. It's kind of like being on a master's program where you know what you want. Education starts out here, right? And as you go, it ends up here, and you end up being what you want. Most of the time. Teachers must keep learning to help students learn. We just talked about that. All right, let's get back to our roots for a minute. Let's talk about some American Indian perspectives in classroom management. I know you've all been waiting all semester to hear this stuff. Do I sound overly sarcastic today?
No more than any other day.
Brave man over there, brave man with that nice shirt on. Okay, there's a strong correlation between strong cultural knowledge and ties and academic achievement of American Indian students in middle school. I'll read that one more time. There's a strong correlation between strong cultural knowledge and those who don't have strong cultural knowledge. Here's what we found. There's two perspectives when you're talking about Indian students in the state of, well, in the Midwest. This study was in the state of South Dakota, luckily. There's the people who are very, very traditional. They generally excel in school, in middle school. The other side of the coin is there's a small, very small group of Indian people who are very, very enculturated / assimilated. They tend to succeed. And then there's the middle. And the closer you get to the middle, oddly enough, the harder time people get. So we're talking about a reverse kind of bell curve. Because when people get to that very middle, a lot of times they're very, very conflicted about who they are. Are they traditional thinking people? Are they not traditional thinking people? So it's a little bit different. When you're talking about the dominant culture, the bell curve runs the other way. Students have been raised with traditional American Indian teachings, or the students who are almost totally acculturated to dominant culture are rarely seen for discipline referrals. So not only academically, intellectually, but also for discipline. Holds the same way. When you start getting kids that are very, very confused about their own identity, you start to have problems. Thank you, boarding schools, right? We're trying right now to get teachers to not go with a lot of the traditional educational assimilationist sort of policies or the acculturationist sort of policies. We're trying to get teachers right now to think in terms of what is important for students. What do you leave in? You folks have an incredible advantage. Just think if you never would have taken this class and you would have gotten into teaching. I don't know how you would teach anything about Indian people. I really don't. You would have taught what you've learned and what's in the textbooks. We've already talked about how screwed up those are. You're going to have to make some decisions and reflect on what you've learned and not be afraid to use what you've learned in the classroom. As we know, the early boarding schools established for American Indians stripped Native children of all symbols of their cultural heritage. We skipped a class in here that was going to talk about boarding schools. But you do need to know what I'm talking about. The boarding schools were schools, boarding schools, as they're called in Canada, residential schools, where Indian kids were literally ripped from the arms of their parents and shipped off to school. Sometimes for as little as 3 to 5 years, sometimes for the entire 12-year duration. These schools were generally focused on 3 things. Number 1 is to make them Christians. Number 2 was to make them white Christians. And number 3 was to make them vocationally oriented white Christians. They're very, very cruel. I did my dissertation included some boarding school stuff. Most kids in school were sexually assaulted. In fact, it was so bad in Canada that they just did blanket reparations for every single Indian person in Canada. Kids were shipped on trains, sometimes as much as for a week. That's how far away from their home they went. By the way, South Dakota had quite a few boarding schools, or still do. Once the kids got to the boarding schools, the first thing that happened was their hair was cut. If you know anything about Indian people and long hair, it's very, very important. It's not comfortable, and I personally don't like it, but it's very, very important. Then they worked on their language. If Indian kids spoke language, they got the switch. And they got it long and they got it hard. My dad still has scars, or had it when he died. Had scars on his back from being whipped by the priests and nuns. The other thing, Clyde Delacourt tells a story about his grandmother who spoke her language, which was Ojibwe, and she was made to clean all of the toilets while kneeling on corn. And she never was able to walk the same after that again. You were taught, all of your cultural heritage was taken from you, stripped from you, and replaced with the dominant cultural kinds of things. And it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. What we did by doing that is we took a whole generation of Indian people and stripped them of their culture. The objective, and this is the objective, this is written everywhere, read any school, Brenda Child writes about this a lot. All kinds of authors write about this. The objective, as it's put in the United States, wherever, law, the boarding school laws, was to remove the Indian from these people so they could not pass it on to their generation, so they could not pass it on to their generation, so they could not pass it, and so on and so forth. It was about culturally and ethnically cleansing through public law Indian people. Along with that came this ridiculous notion that Indian people have to carry identification cards. And I've got my identification card, but nobody better ever ask to see it without me offering to show it. Because I'll run right to my lawyer's office in Minneapolis and I'll file a suit quicker than you can think of. Nobody else in this culture's ever asked to show an identification card to who they are, or about who they are in terms of their race or ethnicity. Nobody is, except Indian people. And part of that was you have to be a quarter blood to be enrolled, right? But the government always knew that once you got this assimilationist attitude that people would be marrying outside of the tribes. Generation after generation, the blood quantum of India, the Indian blood quantum, and people got smaller and smaller. And the objective for that was that the United States government would not have to pay so much money to Indian tribes that they were owed because they took the land, right? You take land, you're supposed to pay money. Indian tribes never saw that money. Never saw it. The BIA skimmed it off and it went other places. And right now there's lawsuits that are in the trillions of dollars. Indian people are owed literally trillions of dollars. That's not even mentioned in the national debt conversation. It's not taken that seriously. Here's the good thing, if you're an Indian person, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, who was among the first to establish, not the casinos we see in South Dakota, but the giant casinos. If you've ever been up to, anybody here been to Mille Lacs or Hinckley or anything like that? The casinos are much, much bigger than they are around here, and they pump out money like you wouldn't believe. If you've been to Shakopee in Minneapolis, those casinos, we're talking, band members that earn $38,000 a month. So there's lots and lots of money there, and what they're able to do with that money in Mille Lacs. And by the way, there's only 3 casinos in the entire country that pay out directly to their band members. So Indian people aren't rich. That's a myth. And I've heard time and time and time again that, well, why don't you just go to your band and get money? It's like, my band? They don't have money. What are you talking about? And most Indian tribes don't have casinos. 90% of the Indian tribes in this country do not have casinos. So it's all a myth. It's being kind of perpetuated by the few casinos that are out there. As I was saying, Mille Lacs now has the money to hire lawyers. And they're going after these treaty cases. And they haven't lost yet. And the state of Minnesota hates it because they're winning all these cases. They're winning their tribal and hunting rights cases. They're winning land rights cases left and right. And it's funny because there's an irony there, right? Because Indian people aren't dropping those quarters into those stupid machines. So, what comes around goes around, I guess, after a while. One of the big objectives in Indian country right now is actually to establish boarding schools. Surprised? To kind of reverse the effect. Because there's so few people out there that actually know much about the traditions. The objective is to bring Indian people to boarding schools, teach them how to be Indian people again, and teach them their culture, teach them their ways, their beliefs, educate in a way that they know how to educate. We've been talking about this all semester. Whether it's from our perspective of how we see money, or whether it's from a different perspective. It's different. Culturally, it's different. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it. So that's one of the things that's on the table right now. In the public schools, what we're trying to do is bring back as much of those traditions as possible, and to start teaching people exactly what you've been slowly learning in this course. You have to educate people in different ways. You have to understand those different ways. And because we're in South Dakota, we've got a heavy Indian population, you're lucky enough to have been educated a little bit at least in some of those ways, so you can implement some of those ways. And I know you will. I know you will, no matter how you feel about this class or how you felt about taking it initially or how it ended, anything. I know that you will because you know them. And because teachers are good moral people and they think really progressively for the most part. So, I have the utmost confidence that you folks are going to do just fine. Questions about anything so far? Yes, thank you.
You talked about bands.
Yep.
Honestly, at first I thought you meant like live bands that came in and played at casinos, but what do you mean by that?
I once saw Aerosmith at the Grand Casino. It's kind of a, there's bands, tribes, nations, bands, tribes, nations, clans, bands, tribes, nations, families, clans, bands, tribes, nations. So it's just that kind of thing.
Okay.
There's also rubber bands. You can buy those at Staples.
Come on.
Yes, thank you.
What's the importance of not cutting your hair? Like, what's the importance behind that?
Well, it's history, and if you know about hair, and I didn't know this actually until 10 years ago or so, but you can actually trace back things that you've eaten
Yep.
in your hair 15 years ago. It's amazing. It's just amazing. I think long hair is a pain. I hate brushing it. My kid throws a fit every single morning. But one of the first things that my old man told me was, you gotta stop cutting your hair all the time. Because it's part of who you are, right? If you come to my house, you're gonna think I'm really, really strange because I've actually got a bag of hair in my closet. We save it, right? And we don't save it very long. I mean, and then we wrap it up in cotton cloth, do a ceremony, and give it back to the Creator. We burn it. So, I mean, it's not as gross as it might sound. And all hair is protein. It's all it is. There's nothing gross about it. But it's a pain. I mean, I hate having long hair. I used to have really, really short hair. At one time, I had a mullet.
Nice.
And my kids have pictures in their house of me with a mullet, just to take me out. And I also had a fanny pack on that day. And that was by, that was just because I was fooling around, but they just happened to snap the pictures. My kids are great. I mean,
When was the last time you actually cut your hair?
I haven't cut my hair since about 1990. No, actually I did once. I was working one of those automatic electrical drain openers. You know what I'm talking about? I don't know if anyone knows what I'm talking about. There's snakes that go down into drains. And this particular one, I couldn't tell whether the switch was on or off once it was on, kind of thing. And I got my hair caught in it. And I just literally wound down like that and just barely managed to flip it. Otherwise, it would have took my whole head in there. And I started walking myself through the snake to unwind my hair. And I was even careful about it. I was wearing a hairnet, believe it or not, because I knew that if I didn't, something was going to happen. But I got to the end and it was a knot. And so I cut off about that much. It sucked. I mean, the whole drain thing. Cutting my hair wasn't bad. Well, for instance, we'll cut our hair, like when my dad died. I took a braid of my hair, cut it, and put it in the coffin, so I can go with him on his journey, in case he needs help. I think that's a pretty cool tradition. Any other questions? We're going to be talking a lot about these kinds of things, this classroom management things, and we're going to be taking a lot from what we've gone through already and trying to bring everything together for you. So by the time you leave, you're going to feel semi-comfortable with the notion of going in front of classrooms and talking about these kinds of issues. And going in front of classrooms and making sure that all of your students are going to get a fair education from you. That's only going to reflect on, the only thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help you become the greatest teacher you can be. So you can continue to make money, continue to make a living, and have a good life and not worry about and have ulcers, the principals on your tail, and that kind of thing. Only trying to help you. if I could get rid of grades in this class, that would be the perfect scenario. I've actually talked about it with my dean. So I think students would come in here less apprehensive if they didn't have a grade hanging over their heads. What do you think about that? Because basically, if you've noticed, much of my assignments are basically pass-fail with a grade adaptation, right? Generally, I'll give people either the full amount or nothing. But again, it's about, teaching up here and knowing that you're going to be grabbing something in here. But if you go to places, progressive universities like Evergreen University, you ever heard of Evergreen? It's in Washington State. It's probably the most progressive place in the country. Carleton College in Minnesota, Harvard, lots of their classes don't have grades. There are other ways to get assessed, but I think grades are something that actually, I think students worry too much about them. And I realize that you're coming in here hoping to get a good grade and all that kind of stuff. And you've probably heard that, I took Cheeseman's class, you would get a grade in there, that kind of thing. But I think grades are a hindrance to some degree. I think you'd talk more if the worry of me, I think, and I've had students tell me this over the years, that they're afraid to say things in class because they might piss me off. And then if they do that, then they won't get a good grade. You see what I'm saying? I mean, and there's this whole kind of trickle-down thing. I think if you came in here knowing that grades weren't all that important to me, and they're not that important to me. I'm not concerned with that. That's the worst part of my job. But if you came in here and not having that grade and that power of the professor hanging over you all the time, I think you'd be a lot more open and subjective, and also a lot more willing to engage in more discussion. One of my big frustrations is to get you to ask questions, if you haven't guessed. Let me run this by you real quick. We're revamping the entire online courses, right? So you're lucky you didn't take this online, because if you've got friends that are planning to take this over the summer, it's going to be very, very rigid. You might want to tell them that, by the way. I'm trying to look around to see if anybody's reacting to that. But they may want to hold off till fall. And again, we're experimenting a little bit, but this is one of the things that we had in mind, or I had in mind, that I've been talking with a friend of mine in Mississippi, at the University of Mississippi about, who teaches a similar class. Really struggling down there, by the way. He's really, really struggling. But anyway, I'm figuring out, and we're kind of looking at this hybrid model, right? Of doing D2L and face-to-face. Now, I'm not a D2L person. I think that, and by the way, we're looking at the possibility of scrapping the whole D2L system and bringing in a different system. And I know there's ones out there because I've worked with better ones than this. This one drives me nuts. Even with the workbooks, we actually, not me, but my GA actually had to do the workbooks like 3 times because he keeps forgetting to hit save, right? You hit save after every single thing you do on that stupid thing. Anyway, one of the things that I was discussing with my buddy, we could fit twice the amount of information in this course. Because theoretically, I could assign you to watch like the movies we've been doing out of class, and also doing lectures in class. Because I showed you the amount of material that we're missing, right? I don't think that's fair to you, though, to actually be watching 2 semesters worth of lecture in 1 semester. You second that motion? If anybody ever has any kind of idea like that, don't be afraid to bring it up. Because one of the things we don't do enough of is get the student perspective on this kind of stuff. But one of the reasons that people are talking about the hybrid classes is exactly for that reason, because you can just do a whole lot more with the class. Of course, with a hybrid, means 51% of your class is face-to-face, and 49 is online, right? And I don't think that'd be good for this course. I think this should be 100% in face-to-face. Or at least 90%. So what do you think about that? Nathan?
Well, I kind of agree that more information isn't always the best, because I'm even learning this semester where my classes are, one class has a quiz and a project due this week, and then the same, where another class at the same time has this due and that due, and then we're doing something else in this class, and then this in this class, and then it's just so much that I don't know, what, 20% towards everything instead of actually doing my best at all. So, like, more quality information would be better than a bunch of information.
I can hear you going, yeah, go Nathan, go. I've often wondered about that, because we don't really map our courses. You know what course mapping is? No? It's where, it's, in every other place I've been, I know I say that way too often, all the professors get together and they decide what assignments you're kind of due, at least in general areas, so they're not, you don't have everything due at one time. But we don't do that here. And, like this course is basically, you know, it's basically backloaded in terms of handing in assignments. But that's done on purpose, right? Because you can't do a lot of the assignments without getting the information first. And the information is so encompassing and it has so many avenues in it that you can't really, I mean, to be effective, it has to kind of be inclusive. And you understand what I'm saying? You have to have this, this, and this in order to do this. So it's different. One of the good reasons why it's good to talk about this stuff in these classes, because it's exactly the kind of thing you're going to be discussing and thinking about when you're out there teaching. The same thing, only on a different level. I suspect that within the next 10 years, you're going to be having things in your classroom that, and I've said this 3 or 4 times now, that we don't even know. I mean, they're not even on the drawing table right now, right? I was looking at this curriculum in one school in Winnipeg where they use apps. Every app is like a book, right? And it's you just click on the apps and the information is on there. And then the lecturing is supplemental.